is the Oracle Analytics AI Assistant webinar. And we have some really great information for you guys today. And so going forward, I do want to show our safe harbor statement. I'm going to leave it on the screen here just for a few seconds. So I'll skim that before we go forward. All right, so today our speakers are myself from the product strategy team. I'm helping host this webinar. And we have Benjamin Arnolf, also from the product strategy team for Oracle Analytics. And then we have a great session by Jacques Vigeant, and he is the VP of Product Management for Oracle Analytics. So we have a great lineup today. Next, I'm going to pass it to Ben. So it's up to you, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jamie. And let's see. I have an issue with my camera. Let's see if it's going to work. Okay, should be fine. Hi, everyone. So I see we have already 2 questions in the chat. It was fast. Will this webinar be recorded and shared with us? The answer is yes. We are recording the webinar right now, and it will be available on YouTube. I'm going to share on screen here. And then, sorry, I'm going to go here. I know when you put your city in the chat, it's going directly to everyone as host and panelist, so you cannot see it. But basically, we have a lot of people that joined today. We are almost 200. I will do some shootout. So let's see who we have. We have Claire from London. We have Marcello from Miami. We have Mutu from India, Toby from Columbus, Ohio, Jacques, which is also from Miami, is well known there. Asim from Austin, Texas. We have Purna in Nashville, Stefano in Rome, Chari in Madrid, Francesco in Roma also, Rob in Flint, Michigan. A few over, Angela from Italy, Narinder from London. We have Sunil from Redwood City, so probably from Oracle, Peter from St. Petersburg, and so on and so on. So thank you everyone for joining. It's really cool to have you. I wanted to let you know how some of you knew about this webinar. It's because we have this Oracle Analytics community website, and this community website, it's exploding. We have more and more people joining it from all over the world, all different people. You can see on this community website different things. So one, you can join the forum and ask questions to Jacques, to myself, to Jamie, to Farid, to anyone. You can also click on view schedule for event here. And when you do that, you will see, for example, Oracle Analytics AI Assistant, but also ton of other webinars. And if you click on this specific page, you are going to be able to click I'm interested or click register here and join the webinar. Again, on this page, you have webinar almost every day. You have training, you have webinar for starters, you have guidance webinar where you can ask questions. You have on-site event. For example, Fari will be in Atlanta for the Data and AI Forum. You can join it also. And then you have ton of things. The second thing I wanted to show you about this community website, it's at the top. You have always some news. For example, we are now leader with a Gartner industry analyst. And 2, we have also some announcement. We are launching a data visualization challenge. And you will be able to use this AI assistant to help you with that. We put also the 4 most important news here. I ask you if you can and if you are interested to click on the first one, and basically you will be able to register to the new Oracle Analytics Data Visualization Challenge 2025. It's going to be, I think, February 3rd to February 28th. We will give you an instance of Oracle Analytics Cloud with some data set, and you will create some data visualization like the one you see here below, and then you will win some stuff and so on. So I'm not going to review all of that, but you are aware of it. On the website, you can see some data visualization. You just have to click and it will open the data visualization for you. It's a specific gallery. Oracle employees are posting on it. You can click here and you are going to see it's going to open that in the specific instance, and you can interact with it. See, for example, in Washington, D.C., how many buildings you have, and you can zoom on the map and do anything you want. And then last thing, news and announcement. When we have things to announce, we put it here. For example, who are the people that are part of the Oracle Analytics community like you? And you will see, for example, a map with everyone which is probably in your country somewhere using Oracle Analytics. But why it's also important to go here, news and announcements, because one, you can subscribe here to receive new email every time we post a news or an announcement. Two, if I look at here, for example, we announced 1 month ago the new Oracle Analytics AI assistant, and you can see on this specific news that Jacques has been replying to ton of questions on this thread, and you will see we will post this webinar recording also here, and you will be able to ask ton of questions. Here we had 25 questions. You have how to start with a AI assistant. You have a blog on it. You have Jacques available every day, every night here. So you can use this website all the time. So I think Jamie will put the website URL in the chat. And I think, Jacques, you are good to go on your side. Thanks, Jamie. Back to you.
Thank you. And I do actually have in the Q&A, I listed the link to or I provided the link to the community site. So I believe the chat, everyone cannot see each other's posts. So we apologize for that. But yeah, check out the Q&A. We do actually have a polling question before we kick it off. So let me share that with you real quick. Let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, so Oracle is actually hosting something called Oracle Data and AI Forum, and if they are, they're both in the United States and in the EMEA region. So if you are interested in attending, please vote in the poll, and I will post that momentarily. Just give me 1 second.
And I see some question in the chat directly, Jamie. So I will say, everyone, if you have any question or if you are raising your hand, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom. If you have it, normally you should have Q&A button in your Zoom bar, and you can ask any question and we will reply to them live. If not, I'm going to check directly with the 2 people that have raised their hand. Back to you, Jim.
Great. Okay, thank you. Next, I will keep this poll up so you guys can vote in it in the next minute or so. But next, let me introduce Jacques Gajant. He is the product manager on Oracle, the Oracle Analytics product management team, and he's actually the vice president. And he is going to give us a great deep dive on the Oracle Analytics AI assistant. And throughout the session while he is speaking, we will try to pepper in some of those answers to your questions that we have. If we don't get to them, we plan on getting to it at the end of the session. So if we don't address it immediately, we will have a final review before we end the call. So with that, Jacques, I will pass it to you. Do you want me to keep sharing my screen, or do you want to share yours?
I'll take over on my side.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
We can.
Great. Let me make sure. Can you see my screen okay?
I can.
You can. Okay. So
yeah, can you put it in full screen, maybe, Jacques?
No, I
Okay.
actually cannot, because I am going to try to make this as a sort of real world workshop as possible, in the sense that instead of just talking to slides, I'm going to flip back and forth between my deck and show you in product what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my slide deck and then flip back and forth between, an instance of OAC and then the slide deck. So if you have any questions, just ask them in the Q&A. And then, if I've asked Jamie to jump in on occasion, if something is very relevant to something I'm talking about, she'll sort of interrupt and we'll take it from there. Now, quickly, we released, believe it or not, the Oracle Analytics Assistant, I guess, starting in September, but it's been an unusual rollout. It's not a typical rollout. We've started by rolling it out to the larger shapes. So we are curious to see how many of you are actually using it right now. So we wanted to poll that question so we can take that back and work from that. But while you guys are talking or answering that poll, I thought it would be interesting to talk about what we announced at Cloud World, where we are in the rollout, and what the next steps are. And then I'll go into some details about best practices and tips and tricks of how to sort of enable your data to be AI assistant ready. So what we announced at Open World was the general availability for what we call the official name is the Oracle Analytics AI Assistant. And we have two sort of modes that we announced. There's what we call the Oracle Analytics out of the box assistant. And what that means to us is that it's an Oracle Analytics assistant that is entirely managed by Oracle. Each customer effectively has their private LLM that we use to assess the questions, to resolve the questions into SQL and ultimately produce visualization. So your data is never shared with anybody. In fact, it never leaves the customer's domain. 100% private. We don't use it to train further models or anything like that. Our goal, of course, is to roll it out to everybody. We had to start with the larger instances initially, so we're just now completing the 10 plus CPUs, and we'll be moving down to the next threshold in the coming months. Our goal is to offer it at no extra cost, which is a strategic differentiator for us. We're excited to bring that to all our customers at no extra cost. And as of today, it's on data sets only. So any type of data set, whether it's a database connection, a multi-table data set, or just a simple spreadsheet, you can load that into OAC and then use the assistant to ask questions. Now, 100% of you are going to ask me, when is subject areas? And we're actively doing internal LA on that. And so we hope to bring subject area support in the first half of next year to be GA. We're working on some final screens for that. Now, the out-of-the-box assistant is really a language model that's targeted to your data specifically, each customer's specific data. So you can't ask it about the weather in Europe. You have to ask it questions relating to the data that you're actively looking at. And but in addition to that, we announced that we will be making available very soon. So I'll call it the first quarter of 25 of calendar 25, the availability for customers who have, for example, in the first iteration, it'll be support for OpenAI. If you have an OpenAI license, you can actually put that into the Oracle Analytics console and then use the powers of OpenAI and the public domain information to ask questions of your data. And so that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it'll be available to all shapes right out of the box because we're not hosting and we don't have to deploy compute to each customer to host the language model. The other nice thing about mashing up effectively public domain information with your data is you could ask questions that go beyond your specific data set. So I could ask, hey, what are my sales since COVID, right? COVID is not some data element that you have in your data, but OpenAI certainly knows that March 2020 is when COVID about started. And so we can take public domain knowledge, marry it and do an intersection with the private data that we have access to, and then of course do the appropriate queries. So that's really interesting. The downside, it requires a key, so you have to provide your OpenAI key. And your data is not your data. I should be very clear here. We never send your data to the external LLM, but we do have to send the questions for the LLM to give us feedback that we then turn into queries. So there is that sort of knowledge that's shared, if you will, with OpenAI in this instance. Our goal is to have support for, the top LLMs, and so just happens that the first one is going to be OpenAI GPT-4 to be precise. Now, a question for the community. So which large language model would you like to see in the Oracle Analytics AI Assistant? So that's the question for the poll. And so one thing about this poll that's actually would be interesting. Recently, I was working with a customer or two customers, and I was asking them, hey, which is your LLM of choice? And they both responded, it's OpenAI. And it's like, oh, great. Maybe, we can do some collaboration there. And when we got closer, they actually meant the Azure connection to OpenAI. So for those of you who are using that, if you could put that in other, that would be helpful just for us to understand how popular that sort of option is versus what I'll call the native OpenAI, even though ultimately the results are similar. So anyways, so let's talk a little bit about what is this AI assistant that we're talking about. And so rather than show you a slide here, I'm going to drop in and talk about what we call the anatomy of the Oracle Analytics AI assistant. So from an anatomy perspective, where does this assistant appear, at least in this incarnation? Because we have plans that go far beyond, as you can imagine, what we're showing today. Now, in this incarnation, right now, the assistant is available to workbook authors only. Now, of course, the value becomes exponential once we release it to anybody looking at a dashboard where they could sort of go off-roading and ask natural language questions of the dashboard. We absolutely are working on that, but we wanted to nail the experience with the authors before sort of branching out to the broader sort of community at large. And so the assistant here appears as part of our effectively advanced auto insights panel. So here you'll have an option called the assistant. And so now in context of this workbook, I can ask questions. The questions will be targeted specifically to the data that's in play in my workbook at this point in time. And you can have multiple data sets. A lot of people assume it's just one data set at a time. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 data sets in the workbook, it'll figure out which data set has the likely answer to your question, and then you can issue it from there. So the other sort of way that you can see this panel is this little tab on the bottom. So now, of course, you've got a simple text box. What would you want to ask? You could ask something like, what's the relationship between sales and cost based on cities? As you type, it's showing you relevant information that we can derive from the data set that is, in play. So here it's returning an answer. It's showing me in this instance the relationship between shipping costs, sales in the various cities around the world. Sometimes we like to sort of produce alternate visualizations because maybe the default that we showed isn't necessarily the most intuitive one that you would want. So here we can look at, sales by city versus cost by city. Sometimes we'll show different aggregations, so you can see, the total by customer segment versus the details in the first chart. But the first chart is always the most dense. For those of you who are familiar with Ask on the homepage, some of the correlations or some similarity exists with how we produce the visualization. Now, we also, this is a sort of a little piece of or little feature that for now is somewhat hidden, but I have so much excitement around what we call the additional insights. Because from the question you ask, we behind the scenes can run a bunch of sort of advanced analytics that is largely influenced by some of the heuristics and ML that we run as part of the auto insights algorithm. And so if you're asking here, I asked about cost and cities, but it's highlighted some meaningful. Now, this is demo data, so it's not that interesting in this example, but it's highlighting that, certain years or maybe certain products are accounting for the largest, relationship between cost and sales, for example. So anyways, it's sort of an interesting feature that goes beyond the question you actually ask, and we're going to try to start pushing insights to the surface from there. So now this is a iterative conversation. So I could say, hey, I want to look, maybe just look at it for New York and Chicago. And maybe I want to, add Paris. Um, and then we also have these notion, we call them modifiers. So now you see Chicago, Paris, and so forth. Sometimes typing a question isn't the most effective, or efficient way to get to your results. So I could say here, change this to a bar chart, but, we're trying to provide I could just sort of click this icon and it's giving me sort of shortcuts to ultimately produce a sentence, which is change chart type to a bar. So I could have said it or shown it. Same with like, if you don't know all the columns, like let's say you had a ton of columns here, I could say, hey, add column, and then here it'll list all the columns that are relevant to the query you're currently showing here. So here I'm going to say add column customer segment. And so we're trying to do, natural language is great, but it's not always the most efficient or direct path to success. So we're trying to give you sort of this mashup of, use whichever modality you like that makes sense given your current situation. If you see something interesting, you could add it right away to your watch list on the homepage, keep track of it. I could drag it onto my desktop here, and so now it will apply the style in question. Or I could, move on to a completely different question. So now I'll ask something a little bit more, complicated for those of you who know the kinds of queries we're creating behind the scenes here. So when the price is above $100, what's the average COS? But I meant to say cost, so we'll see what the model does here. So it didn't understand. It's asking me to rephrase my question. And this time we'll ask for the average cost. And so here we can see that based on a unit price of over, $100, it figured out the average shipping cost is X, right? So for, those of you who know the kinds of things that are going on in the background, that's a pretty, a little bit more elaborate of a question. So if I were building this viz, I would have to know where do I go to create a viz filter and get pretty detailed. So here, now I could say add priority and product type. So I'm adding more than one sort of action within one sentence. So I'll drag this one here as well. And so here you can see that it created a filter here. So now I could, change that if I wanted to. And it sort of organized the viz in a way that's or using the grammar, the viz grammar that we call it. If you want to sort of reset your chat, you can hit the clear assistant icon, and that effectively covers sort of the base capability. Now, you can do things like, this is one of my favorite sort of just natural language benefits, is when you're talking about last year, last summer, last spring, between March and July, those are, it's so much easier to just say last summer than for me to open a calendar, pick the start of the summer and the beginning, right? And so that's an example of where natural language is actually much more effective than using the UI. Other types of sort of interesting sort of natural language benefits. So what were the average daily sales in the last 12 months? So here it actually picked today and went back 12 months, right? So it wasn't last year, it's the actual last 12 months. And for those, query dorks out there like me, it actually figured out how to do aggregations for, at a different grain. Anyways, kind of cool stuff. So that's the anatomy of the assistant. That's how it all sort of is laid out. And so that is, well, let me go to the next. So the
We have
kinds
some questions for you, if you don't mind taking a pause here. One I want to touch on before I touch on the others is: are we able to save all the questions and auto visualizations in the assistant for later reference?
Yeah, it's definitely an item that we want to add in the roadmap to sort of save your chats, not unlike what you're accustomed to in some of the other. Today, it is a transient conversation and it's not saved, but 100% we are working towards that. Yeah, definitely. Because one of the things when we were discussing this with the team is like, the the flow that you followed is actually valuable because you might, oh, what about this? Oh no, what about that? And so there's value in the exploration path that you take before you decide to, oh, this is the one I want to keep. And so we want to make sure we can save that and archive that in the right way. So
We have a few others, if you don't mind us touching on
yeah,
them.
go ahead.
I'll kind of group them. And
Okay.
so one of the questions is kind of broader, would be: what products does the Oracle Analytics AI Assistant relate to? Because we do have some questions on, I'm using maybe an old Oracle product like Taleo. I think I've seen some people mention Fusion Data Intelligence for HCM or whatever.
Okay.
So could you help us understand that?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So the Oracle Analytics AI Assistant is a capability of the Oracle Analytics Cloud platform. And so any product that's built on top of that platform will effectively get it at some point in time, given the rollout. Now, I was explaining earlier, we started, as you can imagine, as we're rolling this out, we have to sort of add, capacity because, each customer instance has to run sort of a variation of an LLM. So anyways, we're rolling it out slowly. So you may have Oracle Analytics Cloud, but you're 6 CPUs, let's say right now. So you're sort of a medium shape. You will get it a little bit later. It'll appear as we roll it out to the smaller shapes. We just completed the 10 CPUs, and so we should start rolling it, effectively down progressively over the next 6 months, several months, really. We're hoping to be done completely before May. Now, so if a lot of people are asking me, like FDI, Fusion Data Intelligence customers are super excited to get it, and I'm excited for you to get it too. Now, for Fusion Data Intelligence, it's, they are heavily reliant on subject areas. And so, as I mentioned earlier, subject areas support is slated for the first half of next year. So, so the benefits to the Fusion Data Intelligence customers are minimal until we support subject areas. But we are actively working with the Fusion Data Intelligence folks to make sure they can leverage this feature. It's really important to them. And then any other product that connects to OAC, if you're on, the latest OAC, which is November now, I think is completed rolling out, and you're a larger shape, so 10 plus, you should see it appear. Of course, we have fine-grained permission, so you can control who has access to it or not. But anyways, let me sort of continue because I know we have a few other topics, and we'll pick up some more questions along the way as appropriate. So the kinds of questions that we support today for the out-of-the-box assistant is, sort of iterative. I sort of went through most of them. So sort of change chart type, add a category, add a measure, add a filter. Date logic is a lot of value there. Aggregation hints, so things like average daily sales, we're actually smart enough behind the scenes to create the calculation to produce sort of average daily sales at the right grain. The next question people will ask me, oh, can it create calculations? And we are working on that. But right now, if you can't say, you can't sort of instruct it to build a calculation in natural language. That isn't yet available. You can do rankings, what are the top 3 products in terms of sales, the bottom 3, those kinds of things. Value filters, so when sales exceeds 60,000. So those are the kinds of question the out-of-the-box assistant enables today. And again, because it lives inside the workbook for now, when you ask a question, it's targeting that question to the schema that's in play in that workbook. So just keep that in mind. Now, to my dismay, the Gen AI assistant is not magic. And a lot of people have been, trained on this magical experience when they went to ChatGPT and they asked it to write a poem about how they met their wife and husband, and it just made up this magical thing with no help. Now, what people don't realize is before you were able to ask questions of these large language models, a team of scientists have been training it and making sure that the data is curated and structured in a way for the language model to be able to answer those questions. And that's no different for us here. And so you can't just wholesale turn on the assistant and then magically ask it to predict when you'll hit $1 million in sales, which is actually an experience I had. Some customer turned it on and said, when will I reach $1 million in sales of my widget? And they couldn't even answer that themselves through, drag and drop interactions. The AI assistant certainly won't be able to answer if you can't answer that question yourself. There is some simple work that you can do. It's actually not hard, but you just have to think about it, right? So when you ask a question, how is the language model going to be able to relate my question to your schema, your data, your filters, and so forth? And so most of your data today is not necessarily highly descriptive. Now, large language models are great at descriptive and language-based columns, but they're not that great at numbers, ironically. And what's great is Oracle is analytics, or in general, is all about numbers. So our strength is numbers. And we don't do a whole lot of text processing within Oracle Analytics Assistant. So the marriage there is important. But you do have to bridge that gap via some of the tools and tips I'm going to give you today. And so before you can enable the assistant, you sort of have to be thoughtful about describing your data better so that a language model can understand what your business, what your data set, what your subject areas are all about. And so before I move on to the next one is, do you currently use LLMs, and which one, and does your organization have policies regarding the use of LLMs? So when I say LLMs, I'm talking specifically sort of external to your own private LLM. We have seen some customers, one of the reasons we wanted to provide an Oracle managed option, this out of the box, is because we've heard from customers that there are some concerns, especially the public, government agencies, for example, aren't super excited about sending questions to an external language model. So we're very, very curious about that. And so I will move on to the next question. So in the age of AI, you have to think a little bit more differently. It used to be all about the data, but now it's really about the questions. And so you have to make questions the center of your universe when you're thinking about, how do I enable the assistant on top of this data set? you have to almost think backwards. You have to think backwards from your questions. And so the new sort of world of language models, you have to work backwards from questions to how your data is structured. And so you have to keep that in mind. Over the next few slides, I'll sort of walk you through some tips and tricks of what's helpful to um, make the Oracle Analytics AI assistant sort of work more efficiently. So how does this thing work, right? So what is a day in the life of a question effectively? So when a user asks a question, something like, where were my sales of light bulbs last summer? Or what were my sales of light bulbs last summer in Europe? So the way it works is we send that question to a language model, ours or external, depending on your choice. And then the language model deconstructs it or effectively gives us a response in a format that sort of we prescribe about what it thinks your question is and the topic of your question, the measures, the attributes, the regions, the filters, and all sorts of artifacts that we've sort of trained the model to provide as feedback. And so we send a question to the language model. It responds in a manner that we can then take and produce a query from. In addition, when you're using an external model, it can take information from the public domain, like COVID started in March 2020, or the country or the cities affected by Brexit are, London, Cardiff, and whatever, right? And so we can take information from the public domain, but every number you see on the screen, 100% of the numbers you see on the screen are the result of something we did. We never let the LLM give us data. We produce queries and we fetch data from your system based on queries that we generate based on what the understanding of your question was. So that is super, super important for everybody to understand that if you see a number on the screen, it's a result of your data and it is not a hallucination from a language model. That's really, really important. Now, if the language model thought that the capital of Texas was Houston instead of Austin, well, we may have created a query that was sales for Houston, but the numbers are literally always produced as a result of your questions. So how does that sort of work? So if you had a question like, what was the quantity and sales of appliances in Austin? The language model will say, well, quantity, you have a column called quantity ordered, and the aggregation should be, some quantity. Appliances, well, that's a product subcategory. Sales, well, you're going to need to sum sales. And then Austin, well, that's a city in Texas. Then we produce a query, we fetch the data based on the data composition, we'll produce an appropriate chart, whether it's a bar, line, or a map. So that's in a nutshell what happens, right? And between when you ask a question and when you get the results. So how do you set this thing up? There's a lot of talking so far, but the setup is actually pretty simple. And so let me show you, rather than talk to a slide, let me bring up, hopefully, I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna show you how to load data from scratch. So I'm gonna drag a simple spreadsheet here. Let me wait till this finishes. So I'm dragging a simple spreadsheet onto my homepage here. It's a sample order lines. I'm sure a lot of you have played with our demo samples, just a simple set of columns. So I'm going to load that in and go to the data tab so I can find that data set. And so the first step that you do, this is the one I just loaded, is you go to the inspector, okay? Now the inspector, I always like to turn on the enrichments and the insights just because that's helpful. But you go to the search tab And if your instance has been enabled for the assistant, you'll have the ability to index your assistant for, or index your data for the AI assistant. So for those of you who've used Ask in the past, it's very,
Jacques,
yep.
one question, because we have a lot of question about it. So for people to see assistant and index dataset for here, so what is exactly needed? Because some people say they go, they click on search, they don't see the assistant. So I just want you to make it clear on what they should expect. Thanks.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we're rolling it out to the larger instances first. Like I said, we just completed the 10 CPUs and greater. And so for those of you who are not yet upgraded or haven't yet received the feature, you would not see the assistant in the search tab. You would just see, gosh, it's been so long, I don't even remember. I think it just says enable for ask, I think, or none, right? And so this UI would look slightly different to you, where you wouldn't have a drop down that shows the assistant. You would have just the home page, BI search option, which is sort of our previous generation capability. Now, as soon as you receive the update, based on your shape and your region, but progressively you should all get it, you will see this capability show up. Admittedly, this is a different way that we've rolled out features in the past, but as you can imagine, we all know, the compute requirements of these LLMs, and given that we have to associate some compute for each customer, it's a pretty involved process to roll this out for every customer, every size, every region. So it's a progressive rollout. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about what you need to do. Now, remember what I was mentioning earlier. LLMs love descriptive information. They're terrible at just codes and IDs, and that's not that helpful. So if you've got a data set that has column names that are not, this is a nice data set. It has a column name called customer name. That couldn't be more descriptive, right? That's super obvious. But a lot of people have like C name or E name for employee name or customer name, or CID for customer ID. Now, especially if you're connecting directly to a database table or some more raw data source. So the first tip, and the most important tip, is to have as descriptive measure names, attribute names as possible. And then we have this synonym capability. So you can come in here and say, well, customer ID, some people call that a customer number. So you can type synonyms here on the right. You can type multiple, don't mind that. That was a test. Customer segment. Some people just call that segment. Some people call a city a town. Now, you shouldn't, for language model town, it would have figured it out. I'm just being a little detailed here, but product category, subcategory, product name. Some people just call that product. Profit, they might say profitability. Now, the way this works, quantity, they might type QTY, right? Sales, some people might call that income. Some people might call that revenue. Some people might call that, something else. So you just go through, and again, more descriptive is better than not descriptive enough. The other important thing is if you have multiple dates, this is a great tip. If you ask for, show me sales last summer, and you've got invoice date, ship date, order date, whatever other date, the language model is going to well, I've got 4 dates. It's going to pick one. It might not be the one you want. So if you're 90% of all your questions are always going against order date, well, then don't index or don't make available for the assistant the other dates. And then if you have multiple dates, you can say, okay, this is the one I'm going to say as my base date. So you can give it a synonym of date. So if the user says, show me sales by year, it's going to pick order date year, and it's going to do a function to figure out what the year is. So again, this is really important. Now, the other thing that's important here is the subtlety between indexing your metadata and the actual data values. And so for some high cardinality items, you actually don't want to index that for the assistant because it causes confusion and sort of ambiguity, because it's not highly descriptive and meaningful. Things like order IDs, right? So you don't want order line ID. You wouldn't want to index that. Order ID, well, maybe you want to be able to show the order ID, but nobody knows, off the top of their head, the order ID in an analytic context. In your call center, maybe they do. If you've got 1 million customer names, right? Maybe just index the column customer name. You can still call up, how many, show me the customer name for the top 3 customers, and it would show you the customer names. But if you have 1 million customers, maybe don't index the individual names, and things like addresses. And so just sort of be thoughtful. Generally, less is more, right? You're better to index fewer things, and then add progressively when you're starting out, than just turn it on, cross your fingers, and hope it figures everything out. It's not magic, right? So find the 80-20 rule, where the 80 most popular columns and measures and attributes, and then take it from there. So then when you save this, now behind the scenes, and I'm going to run the index, if I go into this again is the one I just loaded, you'll see that now it's training effectively behind the scenes. We're communicating with your language model. Again, this is the out-of-the-box assistant, and we're sending it schema information and some of this summary information that we got from your configuration steps. So that can run for, it shouldn't take very long, but a handful of minutes. And then you can just hit check status. At some point, this will be available, and then you can start asking your questions. In this instance here, you can see I had loaded before the exact same data set. And so now here, I could go ahead and ask it, the same questions that I was going through earlier. Now, just to show you, if you come in and modify this data set and then decide, oh, maybe here we see that I did have ship date. Maybe I want to make ship date my primary, and I don't want to index that other date. When I save it, you'll see here, it goes back and it retrains the model. It trains the model only when the shape of your data changes, not when the data values change. So that's something for you to know. So that's, in a nutshell, sort of the starting point of setting up your data. So you go into the inspector, you index, and you give it more descriptive information, and you take it from there. So what else can I do to tune my metadata for AI? I'm looking at the clock. Wow, I'm going really long. And so, what's the benefit is you can control what users can ask about. So if you have social security number or credit card number or some sort of highly a sensitive column, just don't index it if you don't want people to be able to ask about it. You can, of course, do all the data level security, all of that infrastructure security work that exists in OAC since the dawn of time. That still is all at play. We produce queries. If the user can't access the data, they won't see the results. So you don't have to worry about that. Use synonyms to clarify the technical metadata for the LLM. If you've got 3 dates, disambiguate the columns by adding synonyms. And then be aware that we've seen some customers who have like actual column names with like the copyright symbol, or there's a few reserved characters. So be aware of that. Now, in addition to that, in your data, you may have some interesting facts in your data, but for example, I've got order amounts here or sales. But if a question that somebody, and this goes back to thinking backwards from the question, if somebody wanted to see how many customers have large orders, right? Something like vague, like a large order. Now, we don't necessarily have large order in your data set, but we do have order size, we do have order amount or sales amount. And so you should leverage all of the great tools that we have as part of your data prep to, again, take the numerical data and describe it further for the language model. So, for example, binning is one of my favorite things, right? So you could create a bin here. I could create 3 bins. I could call this one not so profitable, right? Profitable, so profitable, and then highly profitable, right? So now, highly
And
profit.
Jack, just a time check. We
Yeah.
have 8 more minutes, I believe,
Yep.
and we have 20 questions.
Awesome. We're going to go over. So, anyways, my point here is leverage the powers of data prep. So, here, now I've created a column called, description of profitability. And so now I could say, hey, what are my 3 most highly profitable customers or products or whatever, right? How many large orders did I get? That's super meaningful. It took you 5 minutes to come in here, but now the breadth of questions that people can ask is much, much greater. Let me quickly go through. Create groupings, right? So you can use the grouping feature in data prep. Get rid of nulls. Nulls are evil. Language models don't know what nulls are. And so at least go in data prep and in your data quality tools and turn null values into not available or unknown, or at least some textual description. Now, avoid indexing high cardinality columns, addresses, SKUs, order IDs, so forth. And then if we're sort of to boil it down, sorry, I wanted to make sure that we got to the end here, is this is an iterative process. Don't try to index everything. Don't try to figure it all out. Start with 10 columns in a data set, play around, go back and forth, iterate. And that's the way that you tune your metadata. And you're ultimately trying to bridge your data with human speech, right? So again, describe it. What's a happy customer? Is it somebody with a score of above 5, or between 3 and 5 and so forth? So describe your data, describe, clarify your data. Less is more. Don't index columns that you don't think people would ever ask about. Also, things I didn't get to show, but org level 1, org level 2, org level 3. These are often found, especially in subject areas. A large language model doesn't know what that means. And so if you can't clearly express it to the language model, you're better off to not index that data than to have the language model sort of make up that, oh, I think that's an org level 1 thing, right? And then use synonyms to disambiguate. Lastly, in your data, sometimes you have acronyms. This is a little bit tougher to do. So for example, OCI, that's Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OAC, Oracle Analytics Cloud, Oracle Analytics Server. Now, in your data, if people sort of ask using Oracle Cloud when they mean OCI, then you have to accommodate that in your data as well. So you have to have descriptive data there. So that is sort of the key takeaways. I know I ran through that last little bit, but I did want to make sure you all saw that this is just sort of thoughtful work, that it doesn't have to be an administrator that's super technical that does this. It has to be somebody who thinks of the questions and goes back to make sure that the data supports the answers. So hopefully that's useful, Jamie.
Yeah,
Ben,
we have a lot of questions, so we will power through them. But in the meantime, if you can please rate the webinar, and we will try to answer all of your questions. The first one we have 3 questions on. Will it support multi-language? Spanish has been asked twice, French, Dutch. How's that working out?
It's a funny answer. Right now, the assistant is officially only supported in English today. but we know that it works in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Italian, in French, because we have teams all around the world who have used it. Because language models actually can translate your question to English, and so ultimately, um, we do have a high success rate with multiple languages today, but the official language support for now is English only. Just as you can imagine, these language models, are these you have to train them in multiple languages. It gets a little tricky. But I encourage you to try it. Try if you have a question in Spanish, even against an English data set, I bet it works.
Next question. Is there a limit on the number of synonyms that you can assign?
There's 50 per column. So
Okay.
now, so right now, our LLM is sort of at its lowest knowledge form. And eventually, you won't, in many cases, even need synonyms because the language model is smart enough to figure out that, a social and an SSN is the same thing. You won't have to specify it. So we hope that synonyms is a interim step or something only to clarify some really unique customer things like homegrown terminology kind of things.
Yeah. Okay. Some questions about using AI Assistant on OAS, so Oracle Analytics Server.
Yeah, the plan for OAS is to support, because OAS, it requires sort of some infrastructure that sits in the Oracle Cloud along with your OAC instance. For OAS, we plan to support the bring your own LLM modality. So a customer will be able to put their OpenAI and in the future, of course, some other popular models and use it. But they will have to provide the key for that language model that they choose. But the plan is to support it for OAS.
Oh, you might like this question. Is it supported on the mobile app?
We have some really cool stuff coming. It's not right now, but in the next, when we support consumer mode, so when a user who's not an author is going to be able to ask questions about their dashboards, then in mobile, I mean, it's like the dream we always had when we released Day by Day 1,000 years ago, was that you could ask a question, get an answer, and we finally have the smarts to do it better now.
And how about using the assistant using voice?
Yes, that is coming. I can't remember. It's soon, very soon.
Great. Can we train the data to get more accurate answers? I know we addressed that through synonyms partially, but I'll let you kind of speak a little further on that.
Yeah, so we don't actually use the data during the training process for now. There were too many concerns by customers about using data to train a model, and then, anyways, it gets tricky. But we use schema information. So a synonym is at the column level; it's not at the data level. But we do have plans over time to potentially allow customers to upload customer-specific knowledge. I know that's super vague, but we're still working through the details. That would enrich sort of any communication we have with the language model specific to a customer. It's hard. Yeah, it's a bit vague, but there it is.
Let's see. The next question is, if I have multiple data sets, will it join the data sets if the data requested is from more than one data set?
So for now, it won't join it. It'll pick. So let's say, so it won't on the fly join it. But what I would recommend in that scenario is if you create a multi-table data set with those same two data sets and then put the assistant on the multi-table data set, it will, or it'll leverage the join that you defined. So that's sort of the workaround for now. If you have two data sets that aren't joined in a workbook and you ask a question, it'll pick the data set that is that has the most overlap with your question. So if one has one column that matches and the other one has three columns that match your question, it will pick the higher matched data set. And there's an affordance in the UI to reissue that question specifically to another data set.
We have a question about insights. They're asking if it'll be available for semantic models in the future. And we're all smiling.
No, we're all smiling because it's
highly requested.
There's a team working on that. There's definitely some work being done to support that. I don't have a date though.
Okay. Let's see. And we have some questions about if it'll be available in Oracle BI Classic answers in the future, and would embedding an Oracle Analytics DB workbook into Oracle BI Classic make it available?
So there are no short-term plans to make it available in the classic world, if you will, right now. So you would, but once we push it to a subject area, or once we enable subject area, so much of the classic content is on subject areas, of course. So conceivably, unless you really, really want to be in the classic dashboard UI, which we're finding fewer and fewer of our customers actually want to be there. They now are starting to completely migrate to DV. So there's no immediate plans to do that. But we're always
so another question for time-related queries within the last within the last 6 months, will the query engine convert that to precise dates for today, or will the last 6 months be a different set of months next month if I say my query? And if it is static, can I construct my query in a way that it reinterprets it again?
Yeah, right now it converts it to the dates based on, so if you saw when I dragged the last 12 months, I think it had converted that from 12/3/23 to 12/3/24. And so that viz is sort of pinned to that context. Yeah, so it doesn't do relative dates for now. Well, yeah.
Okay, let's see. We have a question about, can you tell me about the LLM that can be used in Bring Your Own LLM? Does it use the model of OCI Gen AI or an external LLM API key?
So the first external model we will support is what I'll call native OpenAI. So you'll have to sign up an enterprise agreement or a user agreement with OpenAI and then get the API key and you put it in the console. It's actually a pretty straightforward procedure. So, yeah, and then ultimately our goal here, you'll see LLM connectivity, and you'll be able to effectively power different features using different LLMs. Now, the goal, of course, we will support over time Cohere, Llama, Gen AI services, and the usual suspects. Part of the reason we were pinging you about which LLMs you are actively using is to help us prioritize. We hear a lot of great things about Anthropic. I love Anthropic. Is that the second one we'll support, or is it Gemini, or is it Llama? Anyways.
Next question. I know that LLMs are very compute intensive. When I start using AI assistant, should I expect that my CPU requirements will increase? Or is Oracle offloading that CPU requirement to some other processes that I don't have to pay for?
Yeah, that's precisely why the rollout is slow, because we don't want to bring your OAC instance to its knees by running an LLM inside of your OAC container. So for each OAC instance, we have a sister instance or a brother instance, if you will, that's running an LLM. So every question is resolved outside of your OAC by your private sort of instance that's running the LLM. And the impact is hopefully more people are asking questions, which produces more queries. Those queries are running on OAC, on your OAC. So that's the kind of problem you want. a lot of people are getting their answers from OAC. So now you've got to add CPUs because so many more people are using it. But the actual process of resolving a question is offloaded to the other instance that is required behind the scenes.
The next two questions I want to answer, because we have already answered them. When will the AI assistant be available in OAC for 2 OCPUs? We're looking at beginning of next year under the safe harbor statement. And then also, as it relates to FDI customers, that will be, we have to have subject areas enabled for AI assistant first, and that's slated in OAC for mid-year 2025 and beyond, and again under safe harbor. Once that gets done, then we can start looking at FDI. So the next question, so we have a few more left. Does LLM, or I guess does Oracle Analytics AI Assistant support spatial data, geo coordinates?
Well, so we end up like, if you're asking about geo or spatial questions, and we'll produce a map, the output of your question will produce a spatial result. But like I wouldn't be able to ask like the distance between 2 points using a road in the AI assistant today, right? Like if that's the realm of the questions that you're asking. But conceivably, if you've modeled your data in such a way that you could express that to the language model, then you could. But there's no special spatial accommodations in the assistant per se. Vague answer, but I need to know more about that specific use case. Oh, you're mute, Jamie.
Is there a notification that tells us when a customer is ready for AI assistant use?
There is not for now. So they will see it appear, they'll see the option in their inspectors. So once it's available, and they'll see the permission show up in the admin console to turn the assistant on and off for given users. Yeah. You're muted again.
Look at me. Are we allowed to tell our audience which model we are using in the AI assistant?
No. And the reason I say no is because we've worked really hard to provide an infrastructure that allows us to always be on the best price performance model for you. And as we know, from month to month, these models are leapfrogging each other. Llama 3.2 is just badass. It's super awesome. And so our entire part of the value of our out-of-the-box solution is that we're constantly assessing which model performs best, and that's a pretty complicated task at resolving analytic questions. And so you may not even realize it, but we might switch from one model to the next, and you'll never know, other than all of a sudden it's answering a whole bunch of more sophisticated questions behind the scene. And that's sort of the way we sort of want to keep it for now. So yeah. And if I tell you what it is today, I know for a fact that it might not be that 3 weeks from now. And you can't do you don't have access to the language model yourself. It's completely behind the scenes. It's completely black box.
Great. Let's see. This question, will AI assistant be available if OAC is under customer compartment? I'll admit I'm not entirely sure the context of that.
Yeah, maybe reach out to me directly. I'd need more details on that specific question.
Yeah, that was posted by an anonymous attendee. So if you're still on and you want to ask us, ask in the forums, or if you want to email us directly, if you have our email, so go ahead and do that. Let's see. This is an interesting question. So can the analytics AI assistant run separately to FDI and then also run in main Fusion act as an analytics assistant for more than more general users like ODA does?
So the assistant runs on data. If OAC can connect to the data, then the assistant can run on that data. Now, the only limitation right now, there's subject areas aren't quite ready yet, but they're right around the corner, and multi-dimensional sources, so aren't quite available yet. But if behind the scenes, if you're using Taleo and you've figured out how to connect OAC to Taleo, and then the assistant will work for you. If you're an FDI customer and you have done on your FDI customers have OAC underneath. If you've got some data sets that you want to explore, then your administrator conceivably could take a look at using the assistant on some of your custom data sets that you have that aren't in the subject areas. But the high value of FDI is those subject areas. So that use case is sort of somewhere in the middle. And of course, Fusion customers, who have OAC, if they know how to connect to their Fusion sources directly, then conceivably they could turn the assistant on that.
Okay, next question. Let's see. Will the AI assistant use table/column comments as metadata?
So some of the big sort of infrastructure work that we're doing right now is to make all of the metadata in OAC, columns, subject areas, project descriptions, more descriptive. As I mentioned earlier, language models love language, right? And if we only have a 50 character description on a column, we should probably make that, 1,050 characters so that you can highly describe what this column is, when it's used, what its value is, and which situation this column is used to resolve. If you're able to feed that, if we're able to use that then to further inform the language model, then that's our goal. So for now, the column names and the synonyms are the primary descriptive elements that we share with the LLM. In subject areas, we plan to leverage more of the descriptive elements. But then as a broader platform, we want to make our metadata more AI friendly in general. But that's a long tail, kind of longer term goal.
Next question, and we have 3 left, and really 2. One's more of a comment. Does it support formatting of the visualizations? For instance, the number formatting or the color scheme. So maybe you can modify it.
Yeah, some really cool use cases that are in the pipeline but not available today is like let's say you have a dashboard and you're in there and you say, hey, make all my currency fields 2 decimals with a $sign. Like, how many clicks would that save you? It'd be insane. Or hide all my legends, or make my negatives in red. Like those are all things that aspirationally we're working towards. We're not there yet. At first, we wanted to get question, respond with data, and a viz. And then these sort of viz modifiers, we call them. But ultimately, everywhere in the product, you can expect over time to have voice enabled shortcuts, I'll call them. I don't know. It's great because if you don't know where to go in DV to like format the decimals to, because there's so many options, just try it with voice. But that's not enabled yet. But yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah. And maybe an addendum to that too, it's not like you can't edit the ones that the DVs that it suggests once you add it to your visualization. That the workbook author can go in and make those, maybe decimal changes or color changes. They can do that. We just can't currently ask it through the chat, but it's something we strive towards.
Absolutely. Those are first class vizzes like any other viz. The canvas doesn't know where it came from. It's straight up just another viz.
All right. So the next question is more of a statement, but maybe you want to follow up on it too. I think so this is coming from the person who's asking. I think the task of indexing should be done by a power user role or a data product owner, as that person will have a better perspective of what needs to be processed by the LLM. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes and no. So I believe the descriptive elements should be a business user. And what we don't want is for a business user to fill out a spreadsheet, hand it to their tech guy, who's going to go in and like copy paste from a spreadsheet into. And so, but I do agree that having a technical person will know things like cardinality, which are important. So, so we didn't want to make it an IT or tech only experience. Now, the truth is that you have to have elevated privileges to go describe these synonyms and these inspector options. So ultimately, it is sort of an administrative capability. But we believe that the descriptive and describing the data element to the language model is a business function, not an IT function. The business users know when to use this measure more than IT.
Okay, last question. And if we do have more questions after this, if people do think of more, I encourage you to use the Idea Lab. Not the Idea Lab. The forums, the Oracle Analytics Community forums. We've posted the link in the chat and in some of the Q&A as well, and the answers of the Q&A. So. With this last question, is there any leverage if your database, or let's see, it might be, is there any leverage of your database where the data set resides from is an OCI and or the new 23 AI version?
I mean, in general, when you're using an Oracle database, you get some extra bang for the buck. I don't mean that like a marketing guy just trying to sell you some Oracle database. That's not what I mean. But we have deeper integration to the Oracle database than other databases, right? So we can ship functions to the Oracle database that we couldn't necessarily do for Snowflake or whatever the other systems are that we connect to. Having said that, so if you're using some of the machine learning or even like the classification options in the database, those are perfect examples of how you would take data and make it more descriptive for the language model to use. And so in that respect, those tight integrations that I'm sure you've all talked to Philippe Lyon over the years, all those tight integrations with the ML and AI capabilities of the database can be used to describe the data in that database, which then the assistant connects to. But there's no like special switch that shows up when in the UI when it's a 23i database.
Okay, well, that's all of our questions. For those who are still on 20 minutes after the end date or end time, thank you for joining. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And yeah, so if you have any other questions, we encourage you to use the Oracle Analytics Community Forums. We have many people answering questions there. With that, I think I'll call it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.